The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu had no prices. Because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Soft jazz drifted between candlelit tables. Crystal glasses caught the light. Every person in that room wore their wealth like a second skin, and they knew it. But tonight, one table had gone very, very quiet. Mr. Ebuka sat perfectly still. His agbada, deep navy blue, hand-stitched with threads of gold along the collar and chest, caught the candlelight like something royal. His gold ring sat heavy on his finger. His wristwatch alone could have bought 3 tables in this restaurant. And yet, his wallet lay open in front of him. Empty. He pressed one hand against his forehead, his eyes shut tight, not from confusion, but from something that looked almost like shame. The bill sat on the table beside his untouched wine glass. $1,200. The restaurant manager appeared at his shoulder. He didn't crouch down. He didn't whisper. He stood tall and let his voice carry just far enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Sir, this is a 5-star establishment, not a soup kitchen. Phones came out. At the table just beside him, a group of influencers in designer outfits turned their cameras on slowly, the way people do when they want footage but don't want to look like they're enjoying it. One of them smiled behind her glass. Another whispered something. Laughter, low, clipped, expensive-sounding laughter, rippled through the group. The big man in the beautiful agbada couldn't pay his bill. That was the content. Nobody moved to help. Nobody except one person. Janet had been on her feet for 11 hours. She was working a double shift again, the second one this week. Her uniform was pressed, her posture straight, her smile intact even though her lower back had been aching since noon. She was the kind of woman who never let the weight show on her face, because she'd learned a long time ago that the moment you look tired in a room like this, you become invisible. She had been standing nearby with a tray of receipts when she heard the manager's voice. She watched Mr. Ebuka's shoulders sink. She watched the phones go up. And something shifted behind her eyes. Not pity, not performance. Something quieter. Something that had a cost. Because Janet knew, better than anyone in that glittering room, what it felt like to be looked at and not seen. She set her tray down slowly, reached into the small pocket beneath her apron, pulled out her debit card, the one connected to the account she had been feeding, carefully, painfully, for the last 7 months. Her father's surgery deposit. $1,200. Saved one shift at a time. She walked to the manager, placed the card in his hand, and said 4 words in a voice so calm it silenced the table beside them. Put it on mine. Then she looked at Mr. Ebuka, not with pride, not waiting for gratitude, and said simply, no one should be shamed for a meal they've already eaten. Get home safe, sir. And she picked up her tray and walked back to work. The influencers stopped filming. What nobody in that restaurant knew, what nobody could have known, was who Mr. Ebuka really was. And what he was about to do next. Before we go further, before you find out what a $4.2 billion man does when a woman with nothing gives him everything, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next isn't just a story about money. It's a story about what real power actually looks like. Mr. Ebuka Okonkwo was worth $4.2 billion on a Tuesday morning and felt absolutely nothing about it. Not pride. Not gratitude. Not even the quiet satisfaction that people assume comes with that kind of number. He had checked his portfolio the way other men check the weather. Briefly, out of habit. Already thinking about something else before the screen went dark. His penthouse sat on the 47th floor of the tallest building in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble floors so polished you could see your reflection walking toward you. A private elevator that opened directly into his living room. He had a chef on retainer, a driver on standby, and a closet that a magazine once described as a museum of restraint. He owned 400 cars. Not collected, owned. Some were investments. Some were gifts he'd never returned. 3 Rolls-Royces he had never once driven sat in a climate-controlled garage in Lagos, gathering nothing, because nothing stuck to things that cost that much. He also hadn't eaten breakfast with another person in 6 years. That detail bothered him more than he let on. He grew up in Anambra. A small compound, cracked cement walls, a mango tree in the yard that his mother used as a landmark when giving directions to the house. Past the church, look for the mango tree. You've gone too far if you smell the market. 6 children. 1 bathroom. A father who repaired generators for a living and came home smelling of fuel and quiet dignity. They didn't have much, but the table was always full, not always with food, but with people. Neighbors ate there. Cousins passed through. His mother fed everyone who knocked, even when it meant she served herself last, even when last sometimes meant nothing was left. That was the world Ebuka came from. A world where community was the only currency that never lost value. He left at 17 on a scholarship, a second-hand suitcase, and the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. He studied, worked, built, failed, rebuilt. By 31 he had his first company. By 38 he had an empire. The Forbes profile came at 42, and with it, a different kind of world entirely. A world where everyone wanted something. It started subtly. An old classmate who reappeared after 15 years, suddenly warm and familiar, asking about investment opportunities. A cousin who called every month, always on the last Friday, always with a crisis. Business partners who smiled too wide and laughed too quickly and never once asked how he was doing unless they needed something done. He started paying attention to timing. He noticed that his phone went quiet after he declined things. That invitations dried up when the deal fell through. That certain people only used his first name when they wanted something and his full title when they were introducing him to someone else. He hired a personal assistant named Tolu who screened his calls and color-coded his calendar and once, in a rare moment of honesty, told him, "Sir, half the people on this list aren't your friends. They're your subscribers." He laughed at that. He didn't stop thinking about it for 3 months. The boardroom of Okonkwo Group Holdings occupied the entire 30th floor of his headquarters. 6-seat table. Custom lighting. A view that made the city look small and manageable. Every Monday morning, 18 executives in Gucci loafers and tailored suits filed in, opened their MacBooks, and told him what he wanted to hear. Nobody ever told him something was a bad idea anymore. Nobody pushed back. Nobody said, "Ebuka, you're wrong about this," the way his father used to, flat and direct, without apology. He once proposed acquiring a struggling airline on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 6 senior directors had independently sent him research on why it was a brilliant move. The same 6 men who, if he checked their private messages, had spent Wednesday telling each other it was financial suicide. He killed the deal himself. He didn't tell them why. The loneliness wasn't loud. That's what people don't understand about that kind of isolation. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in. It shows up as a slight flatness in the morning. A pause before you answer the question, "How are you?" Because you're genuinely unsure and there's genuinely no one to tell. He had a Rolex on each wrist, not out of arrogance, but because he'd received so many as gifts he'd stopped knowing which one was which. He wore them the way other people wear things they can't throw away but don't know what else to do with. The night before the restaurant, he had sat alone in his boardroom after everyone left. The city glittered through the glass. His phone had 43 unread messages. His calendar had him booked solid for the next 11 days. He had 3 properties he hadn't visited in over a year and a standing reservation at 6 of the city's finest restaurants, all of them secured by his assistant, none of them chosen by him. He spun his father's old ring, a plain brass thing, worn thin at the band, around his finger. He wore it on his right hand, away from the Rolex. It was the only thing he owned that nobody had ever complimented. He thought about the mango tree. He thought about his mother serving herself last. He picked up his wallet, opened it, and removed every card, every note, set them on the boardroom table in a neat, quiet pile. Then he stood up, smoothed the front of his agbada, navy blue, gold thread, handmade by a tailor in Aba who had been making his ceremonial wear since he was 30, and walked to the elevator. He wanted to know if anything real was left in the world. Just one person. That was all he was looking for. One person who would see a man sitting alone and do something about it. Not for a reward, not for a story, not for content. Just because it was right. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she was already on her 11th hour of a double shift, or that the card in her apron pocket held every dollar standing between her father and a surgery that couldn't wait much longer. He only knew that when he walked into that restaurant, his wallet would be empty, and he would find out, very quickly, what kind of world he was actually living in. Before we continue, if you believe people deserve kindness even when the world laughs at them, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this remind us why compassion still matters. Janet Okoro had a system. She kept a small notebook in the left pocket of her apron, not for orders, the restaurant used tablets for that, but for numbers. Her numbers. The ones she ran in her head every morning before her feet hit the floor, and again every night before she allowed herself to sleep. Rent, 42,000 naira. Due the 28th. Transport, 3,500 a week if she was careful, 5,000 if she wasn't. Her father's medications, the ones the hospital said were optional, but that any nurse with a conscience would tell you were not optional at all, came to roughly 18,000 a month, if the pharmacy on Allen Avenue had stock. If they didn't, she took a bus to the one on Broad Street that charged 4,000 more and pretended not to notice. And then there was the surgery deposit. The number that lived at the bottom of every other number like a stone in a shoe. $1,200. Or the Naira equivalent, which changed slightly every week in a direction that was never good. Dr. Fashler had been patient. He was a quiet man with tired eyes and reading glasses he wore pushed up on his forehead even when he wasn't reading. He had explained her father's condition 3 times, once to her uncle who thought he should be the one making decisions, and once more to both of them together when it became clear her uncle had no intention of contributing anything except opinions. The procedure couldn't wait past the end of the month. The valve in her father's heart was not improving with medication alone. It needed to be fixed the way things that are actually broken need to be fixed. Directly, surgically, without further delay. "How are we doing with the deposit?" he had asked her, 2 weeks ago, in the corridor outside her father's ward. "We're close," she said. She was not close, but she was working on it. Janet had been at Eco Prestige for 14 months. It was the kind of restaurant that served water in crystal glasses and printed the menu in a font that was difficult to read on purpose, as if legibility was beneath the brand. The walls were dark wood. African sculptures lined the corridor near the entrance. Tall, carved figures with serious faces that always made her think of her grandmother's sitting room, except here they were decor, not family. She had gotten the job through a friend of a friend and kept it through sheer reliability. She was never late. She never complained in front of guests. She memorized the menu changes every week without being asked twice. Her manager, Mr. Chukwudi, a compact man in his mid-40s who wore the same brand of cologne every day and believed that silence from staff meant respect, had once described her to a new hire as one of the good ones. Janet had smiled when she heard that. Then she had gone to the back, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the small window near the kitchen that looked out onto the car park. A row of Mercedes GLE SUVs and Lexus Jeeps gleaming under the security lights, and thought about what it cost to be considered one of the good ones in a place like this. It cost everything you wanted to say. Stacked neatly out of sight. Her father's name was Emmanuel. He had driven a commercial bus for 21 years. Lagos traffic, 6 days a week, the kind of work that breaks the body quietly and without ceremony. Bad posture, no pension, a diet of roadside food because there was never time to go home for lunch. He had a laugh that filled a room and an opinion about everything from football to politics that he delivered with the authority of someone who had seen enough of life to have earned the right. He had started slowing down 18 months ago. Blamed tiredness. Then blamed age. Then one morning he couldn't finish climbing the stairs and sat down on the 7th step and stayed there until Janet came home from her shift and found him still sitting, too breathless to explain why. The diagnosis came 3 weeks later. She had sat in that hospital corridor alone. Her uncle was on his way for 2 hours before she stopped checking her phone, and looked at the fluorescent light on the ceiling that flickered every 40 seconds. She counted the flickers. 14 times before Dr. Fashler came back out with papers. She didn't cry. She made a list. That was the thing about Janet that nobody at the restaurant understood. She wasn't cold. She wasn't closed off. She simply had a brain that, under pressure, converted emotion into logistics immediately and without consultation. Grief, fear, panic. They all arrived and then instantly became action items. It was the only way she knew how to love someone. The morning of the day she met Mr. Ebuka, she had woken at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling of her single room in Socialites. There was a crack that ran from the light fitting toward the window that had been there since she moved in. She kept meaning to mention it to her landlord. She never did, because mentioning things to her landlord led to conversations about rent that she didn't have the bandwidth for. She checked her account balance at 6:03 a.m. The same way she always did. Screen brightness turned all the way down, phone flat against her palm, like she was bracing for impact. The number looked back at her. She had been building it for 7 months. Double shifts, skipped lunches, a birthday she worked straight through because the weekend premium was too good to sacrifice for cake. She was 3 weeks away from the full deposit, maybe 2, if the tips stayed strong. She made herself tea, not coffee, because the jar of Nescafe she'd had was finished and she hadn't bought more. She stood at her small window with the cup and watched the street below come alive. The bread seller, the Okada riders warming up their engines, a woman hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 poles with the calm efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She had a split shift that day. 4 hours in the afternoon. A break. Then back for the dinner service. She ironed her uniform the way she always did, collar first, then the body, then the apron separately. Hung it on the back of the door. Ate half a plate of rice left over from 2 days before. Checked her notebook. Recalculated. She was, she noted, exactly $180 short of the surgery deposit. She wrote that number down. Circled it once. Then she picked up her bag, locked her door, and went to work. The dinner service started the way it always did. A rush of perfume and reservation names. The front-of-house staff straightening up the moment the first Mercedes pulled into the car park outside. Janet had been back on the floor since 7 p.m. Her break had been 40 minutes, which she spent sitting in the staff room eating a meat pie she'd bought from a woman outside the gate. Scrolling through a WhatsApp message from Dr. Fashla's secretary reminding her that the deposit window closed in 18 days. She read it twice, put her phone face down on the bench, finished the meat pie, and went back to work. By 8:30 p.m., the restaurant was full. Table 7 was a birthday party. Loud, celebratory, 3 bottles of Moet already gone. Table 12 was a business dinner where nobody was smiling but everyone was pretending to. And the large corner table near the sculpture wall, table 9, had been taken by a group of 5 that Janet clocked the moment they walked in. She had served their type before. Young, moneyed, dressed in the particular way that people dress when they want you to know exactly what everything costs. One of the women had a Gucci belt bag worn across the chest like it was casual, which meant it wasn't casual at all. Another had her phone out before she'd even sat down, filming the table setup, the candles, the menu, narrating softly to an audience Janet couldn't see but could easily imagine. They ordered expensively and deliberately, not because they were hungry, but because ordering was a performance. They sent 1 dish back, not because anything was wrong with it. Janet knew that. The kitchen knew that. Mr. Chukwudi knew that. But nobody said anything, because the customer is always right in places where silence is part of the service. She kept moving. That was her method. Keep the tray level, keep the face neutral, keep moving. He came in at 8:47 p.m. She noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit. Not because he looked out of place exactly, but because he moved differently. Slowly. Without the performance that most guests brought through that door. He was wearing a deep navy agbada, gold embroidery along the collar and cuffs, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't come from a mall. A Rolex on his left wrist caught the light as he settled into his seat at table 5. A corner table, slightly set apart, the one guests sometimes requested when they wanted privacy. He ordered without looking at the prices. That wasn't unusual here. He asked for the sea base and a glass of still water, no ice, and then he set his phone face down on the table and didn't touch it again. Janet thought nothing of it. She had 11 other tables. She thought about it later, How a person can be standing right next to the thing that will change their life and feel absolutely nothing. No signal. No warning. Just a man ordering fish and water at a corner table while she balanced a tray of dessert plates for table 7. The bill came to $1,200. She saw the number when she printed the receipt. Didn't flinch. Placed it in the black leather folder the restaurant used and set it on his table with the same quiet efficiency she used for every table. What happened next? She heard before she saw it. A card declined makes a particular kind of silence. Not loud. But the manager appears, and his body language changes. And suddenly everyone nearby becomes very still in the particular way people go still when they're pretending not to listen. She turned. Mr. Ebuka was sitting with his wallet open on the table. Not empty in the dramatic way, just open and flat in a way that made the emptiness obvious. No cards. No notes. Nothing. His hand was pressed to his forehead, elbow on the table. His eyes closed in something that read, to anyone watching, like a man who had just run out of options. Mr. Chukwudi was standing over him. Back straight, voice low but not low enough. Sir, I don't know what the situation is, but this is not somewhere we run tabs. If there's a problem with payment, we will need to resolve it now or involve the authorities. Authorities. He said it cleanly, without drama, which somehow made it worse. At table 9, one of the women from the Gucci Belt group looked up. She nudged the person beside her. A phone came up slowly, camera first, with the practiced casualness of someone who had filmed strangers before and felt no conflict about it. Is that not a whole Agbada man? One of them said, not quietly enough. All that fabric and no money inside his pocket. Laughter. Covered with hands but not really. Janet watched Mr. Ebuka's jaw tighten. He didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the table, on the empty wallet, on the bill folder, on nothing. His right hand found the plain brass ring on his finger and turned it once. Slowly, the way a person reaches for something familiar when everything else is wrong. And this is the part that nobody filming bothered to capture. Because what Janet saw wasn't embarrassment. It was something older than that. Something that looked, to her, exactly like the expression her father wore the first time he had to ask her for money. That specific kind of pain that only comes from a man who has spent his whole life providing, suddenly sitting on the wrong side of the table. She knew that look. She had been carrying the aftermath of that look for 18 months. She didn't make a decision so much as her body made it before her brain finished the sentence. She set her tray down on the service station. Reached into the pocket beneath her apron. Her fingers found the card immediately. She always knew where it was. The way you always know where the thing you can least afford to lose is located. 7 months of double shifts. Skipped birthdays. Tea instead of coffee. $180 short as of this morning. But close enough that she'd let herself believe it was almost over. She walked to Mr. Chukwudi and placed the card in his hand before he could say anything else. Put it on mine. He looked at her. She didn't look back. She was already turning toward table 5. Toward the man with the empty wallet and the brass ring and the closed eyes. No one should be shamed for a meal they've already eaten, she said. Get home safe, sir. She picked up her tray. She went back to work. She didn't check her balance until her shift ended at midnight. She stood outside the restaurant in the car park, the last of the Mercedes SUVs pulling away, the security light buzzing faintly above the gate. She opened her banking app. Screen brightness down. Phone flat in her palm. The account read 0. She stood there for a moment. The night was warm. Somewhere down the street, a generator hummed. She put her phone in her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and started walking to the bus stop. She had 18 days to rebuild what she'd just spent. She'd done harder things. Her father didn't know yet. She wouldn't tell him. He would worry, and worry was the one thing Dr. Fashler had specifically said Emmanuel Okoro could not afford right now. So she walked. And she calculated. And she did not cry, because crying wasn't on tonight's list. What Amora just did is something most people wouldn't dare to do. If her kindness touched your heart, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people discover stories that remind us humanity still exists. Janet was on the floor by 11 a.m. the next morning. She had slept 4 hours. Not because she couldn't sleep longer, but because her body had its own alarm system now, wired, after 14 months of split shifts, to wake before it was asked. She'd lain in the dark for a few minutes staring at the crack in her ceiling, done the numbers again out of habit, and gotten up. She hadn't told anyone what she'd done the night before. Not her neighbor Blessing, who would have called it stupid. Not her colleague Amora at the restaurant, who would have called it sweet and then asked if she was okay every hour for the rest of the week in a way that would have been harder to manage than the silence. She had simply gotten dressed, ironed her uniform, collar first, body, then the apron, and come in for the lunch service like it was any other day. Because it had to be. She had 18 days and 0 naira in the surgery account. Sentiment was not a line item. Mr. Chukwudi had given her a look when she arrived. Not unkind. Something between respect and discomfort, the expression of a man who had witnessed something he didn't have the vocabulary for. He didn't bring it up. She didn't either. They moved around each other with the professional distance of people who understood that some things, once named, become complicated. The lunch service was quiet. She refilled water glasses. She recited the specials. She smiled at a woman who snapped her fingers to get her attention. Snapped her fingers, like she was calling a dog, and Janet smiled, because rage was also not a line item. She checked her phone once during her break. Nothing from the hospital. Nothing from her father. A voice note from her uncle asking if things were moving with the surgery money, which she listened to, locked her phone, and sat face down on the bench. She ate half a container of jollof rice she'd packed from home and went back to the floor. She was resetting table 5, the same corner table from the night before, straightening the cutlery, aligning the water glass, when the front door opened. She didn't look up immediately. Doors opened all day. But then Amora appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless, speaking in the low, urgent voice of someone trying not to cause a scene while absolutely causing one. Janet, there are men outside. What kind of men? Suit men. With folders. And there's a black G-Wagon with 2 more cars behind it. Janet straightened up, looked toward the entrance. Mr. Ebuka walked in first. He was dressed differently today. No agbada. A dark charcoal suit, simple, no tie. The kind of cut that costs more than most people's rent but doesn't announce it. The Rolex was still there. So was the brass ring. She noticed that specifically, because she had noticed it the night before and filed it away without knowing why. Behind him came 3 men in matching grey suits carrying leather document folders. And behind them, a woman in a navy blazer with a laptop bag over one shoulder and the focused expression of someone who had already read every room she'd ever walked into before she entered it. Mr. Chukwudi appeared from the back at the sound of movement near the entrance. He took one look at the group, straightened his jacket, and moved toward them with his customer-facing smile already assembled. Mr. Ebuka looked past him. He was looking for her. When he found her, still standing beside table 5, one hand on the back of a chair, he didn't smile or wave or do any of the things that would have made this easier to process. He simply walked over, stopped a respectful distance away, and said, "I'd like to speak with you, if you have a few minutes." His voice was the same as the night before. Quiet, unhurried. The voice of a man who had stopped needing rooms to be silent before he spoke. Janet looked at Mr. Chukwudi. Mr. Chukwudi looked at the 3 men with folders and the woman with the laptop and the G-Wagon sitting outside his restaurant and made a calculation that took about 2 seconds. "Take your time," he said, to Janet, which was the most generous thing he had said to her in 14 months. They sat at table 5. Mr. Ebuka folded his hands on the table. He didn't open with flattery or a long speech. He said, "I owe you $1,200. I want to return it. But I also want to tell you something first, and I'd like you to let me finish before you say anything." Janet said nothing. She was watching his hands. The brass ring. The Rolex. The distance between them. "I chose this restaurant deliberately," he said. "I'd heard reports, from 3 separate sources, that the staff were mistreated here. Underpaid, spoken to poorly, pushed out when they pushed back. I wanted to see it myself. So I came in without my cards and I waited to see what kind of place this really was." He paused. Turned the brass ring once. I expected to be embarrassed and leave. I did not expect you. Janet kept her face still. She was good at that. What you did last night, he continued, cost you something real. I know what was on that card because I had my team look into the hospital account attached to the payment. I know about your father. I know about Dr. Fashler. I know the surgery window. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger, something more guarded than that. I'm not here to give you money, he said, before she could speak. I'm here because what you did deserves more than a transfer. Kindness on that scale, the kind that costs you something you cannot afford to lose, doesn't just deserve a reward. It deserves a structure. He nodded once toward the woman in the navy blazer, who opened her laptop and turned it to face Janet. On the screen was a document. At the top, in clean black font, Deed of Acquisition, Eco Prestige Restaurant Group. I bought the building this morning, Mr. Ebuka said. The group that owns it has been under investigation for labor violations for 8 months. My lawyers accelerated the process. He said it plainly, the way he might say he'd ordered the seabase. Mr. Chukwudi will be briefed this afternoon. His role is under review. Janet looked at the document, then at him. And what does that have to do with me? Nothing yet, he said. That part is separate. The woman in the navy blazer tapped the screen and a second document appeared. This one had Janet's name on it. She stared at it. I also contacted the board of Meridian Hospital, where your father is being treated. I've covered the surgery in full. It's scheduled for Thursday. The air went out of her quietly. No dramatics. Just a stillness that settled over her the way exhaustion does when you finally sit down after too long on your feet. She didn't say thank you. Not yet. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and for exactly 4 seconds she let herself feel the full size of what Thursday meant. Then she looked up. What do you want from me? She asked. Flat. Direct. The question of a woman who had learned, the hard way, that nothing this large came without a shape attached to it. Mr. Ebuka nodded slowly, like he had expected exactly that question and respected it. I want to offer you a role, he said. But I need you to hear what it actually is before you answer. Because it's not a thank you gift. It's a job. And it will be harder than this one. He leaned forward slightly. The broken system that almost killed your father, the one that makes families like yours choose between rent and surgery, that puts a price tag on a heartbeat, I want to fix it. Not with a donation. With a department. A structured, funded, permanent patient advocacy division inside Meridian Hospital. He paused. And I want you to run it. She took the 24 hours. She spent the first 3 of them doing nothing useful. She sat on her bed in Soyulir, still in her work uniform, and looked at the crack in the ceiling. Her phone had 17 notifications she didn't open. The generator outside her window kicked on at 7 p.m. and filled the room with its familiar low drone, and she sat in that noise and thought about her father. Not about the surgery. Not about the offer. Just about Emmanuel Okoro specifically, the man who used to sing off-key to Fela Kuti on Sunday mornings while her mother pretended to be annoyed. Who kept a worn Bible on his dashboard not for religion exactly but because, he said, it reminded him to be patient in traffic. Who had driven that bus for 21 years so that she could have options he never had, and who had never once, in all the months of illness, asked her how much it was costing her. He knew. He just never asked. Because asking would have made it heavier for both of them. She finally called him at 9 p.m. Daddy. My Janet. His voice was thinner than it used to be. She had noticed that 3 months ago and had been pretending not to notice ever since. You sound like something happened. Something happened, she said. Good something. Your surgery is Thursday. It's paid for. Everything is handled. Silence. Long enough that she checked the call was still connected. Thursday, he repeated. Thursday. He didn't ask how. She was grateful for that. He simply said, okay, in a voice that carried the full weight of a man who had just been told he was allowed to live, and then he said, thank God, and she heard him set the phone down without ending the call, and she listened to the sounds of his room. The TV low in the background, someone in the corridor outside his ward, the particular quiet of a hospital at night, and she did not cry, but it was close. She hung up, sat for another hour. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and started writing. Not numbers this time. Questions. What does a patient advocacy department actually do? What would it have done for us? What would it have done for the woman in the bed next to Dad's who had no one visiting her? What would it have done for the family sleeping in the corridor because they came from Ondu and couldn't afford a hotel? She wrote until midnight. Filled 4 pages. Then she made herself tea, looked at the crack in the ceiling one more time, and went to sleep. Thursday came the way important days always do, looking exactly like any other morning until it doesn't. Janet arrived at Meridian Hospital at 6:45 a.m. Her father was already prepped. He was lying in the surgical bed in a gown that was too big for him, which made him look smaller than he was, which she decided she would never mention to anyone. His reading glasses were folded on the bedside table. His worn Bible was there too. Dr. Fashler came in at 7 a.m., calm and precise as always, and explained the procedure one more time in the way he did for families, simply, without talking down to her. She appreciated that about him. She had appreciated it from the beginning. Her father held her hand before they wheeled him out. "Whatever you did to make this happen," he said, "I know it cost you." "It came back," she said. "Don't worry about it." He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a father who knows his child better than they think he does. Then he squeezed her hand once, let go, and they took him through the double doors. She sat in the waiting area for 4 hours and 11 minutes. She knew the exact time because she counted it. She drank 2 cups of tea from the canteen that tasted like warm cardboard. She watched other families come and go, a woman pacing in Ankara print, a young man who had fallen asleep in his chair with his phone still in his hand, an older couple who sat so close their shoulders were touching and didn't speak at all, which somehow looked like the most intimate thing in the room. She thought about all of them. She had been thinking about all of them since she wrote those 4 pages. Dr. Fashler appeared at 11:17 a.m. Walked toward her with his glasses pushed up on his forehead, which she had learned by now meant he had good news and was slightly tired. "He did well," he said. "Procedure went cleanly. He'll be in recovery for a few hours and then you can see him." She nodded, said thank you, sat back down, and then, quietly, in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and instant tea, she made her decision. She called Mr. Ebuka at 2 p.m. "I'll take the role," she said. "But I have conditions." A pause. Then, "Tell me." "The department isn't a PR exercise. It's not named after you, it's not used in press releases, and it doesn't answer to marketing. It answers to patients." Agreed. "I want to hire from the community. People who've actually sat in these waiting rooms. People who know what it costs to be on the other side of that desk." "Good. And Mr. Chukwudi," she paused. "I heard what you said about him doing my shifts. I understand the impulse. But I don't want that." Silence on his end. "His not the problem," she said. "His what happens when a system rewards cruelty and calls it standards. Fix the system. He might surprise you." Another pause. Longer this time. "You know," Mr. Ebuka said slowly, "I've had people in boardrooms for 30 years and very few of them have ever said something like that to me." "Then you've been in the wrong boardrooms," she said. He laughed. It was a real laugh. She could hear the difference. Not the polished kind that people produce in meetings. The kind that catches a person off guard. "When can you start?" he asked. "My father gets discharged Saturday. Give me until Monday." The Patient Advocacy Division at Meridian Hospital opened 6 weeks later. No ceremony. No ribbon cutting. Just a small office on the 2nd floor with a glass door, 2 desks, a whiteboard, and a sign that read, simply, "Patient support, walk in." Janet hired 4 people in the first month. 2 of them had been patients at Meridian within the last year. One had lost a family member in a waiting room because no one had explained the paperwork in time. Another had spent 3 days sleeping in a corridor during her mother's surgery because nobody told her there was a family support room on the 4th floor. These were the people Janet wanted. Not because they were the most qualified on paper, though they were sharp, every one of them, but because they understood the geography of that waiting room in a way no textbook could teach. Within 4 months, the department had assisted over 600 families with insurance claims, surgery deposits, government health documentation, and accommodation logistics. Within 8 months, 2 other hospitals had called asking to replicate the model. Mr. Ebuka visited once, unannounced, on a Wednesday afternoon. He didn't go to the office. He sat in the general waiting area for 40 minutes, just watching. When Janet found him there, he was looking at the families the way he'd looked at his empty boardroom all those months ago, except differently. With something that had come back into his face that had been missing for a long time. He didn't say much. He turned the brass ring on his finger once, the way he did when something settled inside him, and said, "My mother would have liked this place." Janet looked at him. At the Rolex. At the plain brass ring beside it. At the man who had 400 cars and had been looking, the whole time, for something that couldn't be bought, only built. "Tell me about her," she said. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ebuka Okonkwo talked about the mango tree. There's a proverb that says, "A person who helps you buy a needle when you are naked is greater than the one who offers you a robe when you are king." Janet didn't know she was changing a life that night. She was just doing what she believed was right, with the only thing she had left. That's the part nobody films. That's the part that actually matters. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose waiting room they're sitting in right now.